Story 1. It was Halloween night, and a group of friends decided to celebrate by playing video games. They scrolled through their collection until they came across a game called Spookiest Heroes in Video Games, a collection of horror-themed games that promised to be terrifying. As they started to play, they were drawn into a dark and eerie world, where the line between reality and fantasy began to blur. They played as characters from various games, each with their unique abilities and fearsome foes to overcome. The first game was called The Curse of the Haunted Mansion, and it was set in an old, abandoned house. The objective was to find a way out while avoiding the ghosts and ghouls that haunted the place. As they played, they began to feel like they were being watched. The shadows seemed to move, and strange noises echoed through the house. Then, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from one of the bedrooms. They rushed to investigate, but when they opened the door, they found nothing but darkness. Suddenly, they felt a cold hand on their shoulder, and they turned around to see a ghostly figure hovering in front of them. The figure spoke in a whispery voice, warning them that they were not alone in the house. It urged them to leave before it was too late, but they were too scared to move. Suddenly, the lights went out, and they were plunged into darkness. They heard the sound of footsteps coming closer, and then they saw a ghostly figure approaching them with glowing red eyes. They tried to run, but they were trapped in the room with no way out. The ghostly figure lunged at them, and they felt its icy breath on their necks. They screamed in terror as they were dragged into the darkness, their bodies merging with the game world. The next game was even more terrifying. It was called The Depths of Hell, and it was set in a dark and foreboding underworld. The objective was to find a way out while battling demons and other infernal creatures. As they played, they felt like they were being pulled deeper and deeper into the abyss. The air grew hotter, and the screams of the damned echoed through the darkness. They heard a voice calling out to them, promising them power and wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But they knew it was a trap, and they resisted the temptation. Then, they encountered a demon that was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, with horns as long as their bodies and eyes that burned with a fiery intensity. The demon lunged at them, and they fought back with all their might. But it was too strong, and they were quickly overpowered. They screamed in agony as the demon tore their bodies apart, their souls trapped forever in the depths of hell. The friends never returned from that Halloween night, and their fate remains a mystery to this day. But those who dare to play spookiest heroes in video games, beware, you may never come back. Story 2. There was a time when video games were considered a harmless source of entertainment. But as time went on, rumors began to circulate about certain games that were cursed, haunted by malevolent spirits that possessed players and drove them to madness. One of the most notorious of these games was Deadly Dreams, a survival horror game that was said to be cursed by a vengeful ghost. The game was so terrifying that many players refused to play it alone, and some claimed that they had been physically attacked by an unseen force while playing. As the legend of Deadly Dreams grew, other cursed games began to emerge. There was Whispers in the Dark, a puzzle game that was said to be haunted by the souls of those who had died while playing it. And there was The Abyss, a first-person shooter that was said to be cursed by an ancient evil. Despite the dangers, some gamers continued to play these cursed games, driven by a morbid fascination with the paranormal. They sought out the most terrifying games, hoping to experience a thrill that no other form of entertainment could provide. But as they delved deeper into these cursed games, they began to realize that the legends were all too real. They experienced visions of horrors beyond their imagination, and they felt the icy grip of death closing in around them. The more they played, the more they became ensnared by the cursed games. They found themselves unable to stop playing, driven to madness by the malevolent spirits that possessed them. In the end, they were consumed by the very games they had sought out, their souls trapped in a realm of darkness and despair. And as new players took up the cursed games, the cycle began anew, their fate sealed by their own morbid curiosity. The legend of the haunted games continues to this day, a warning to all those who seek to toy with the unknown. For in the world of video games, the line between reality and fantasy is all too easily blurred, and the consequences of our actions can be dire. Story 3. It was Halloween night, and a group of friends gathered in a dimly lit room to play Dead by Daylight, the perfect game for the occasion. They had heard rumors about the game's dark history, but they brushed them off as mere superstition. As they started the game, they were greeted by a chilling atmosphere. The graphics were incredibly realistic, and the sound effects were so intense that they felt like they were actually in the game. They took turns playing as survivors and killers, each one trying to outsmart the other. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The room grew colder, and the lights flickered ominously. They heard strange noises coming from the game, and it seemed like the characters were moving on their own. As they played, they began to feel like they were being watched. They turned around, but there was no one there. But then they saw a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, watching them with glowing eyes. The figure spoke in a low, raspy voice, warning them to stop playing the game. But they were too engrossed in the game to pay attention. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging them into darkness. They heard the figure laughing, and then they felt something cold and clammy grab their ankles. They screamed in terror as they were dragged into the game, their bodies merging with the virtual world. They found themselves trapped in a dark forest, with no way out. They heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and then they saw the killer emerge from the shadows. He had a twisted grin on his face as he raised his weapon. They tried to run, but they were too slow. The killer caught up to them, and they felt his blade pierce their flesh. They screamed in agony as they were killed over and over again, trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror. They begged for mercy, but the killer showed no mercy. And as they lay dying, they realized the true horror of the game. It wasn't just a game, it was a gateway to hell, a place of darkness and despair where the souls of the damned were trapped forever. The friends never returned from that Halloween night, and their fate remains a mystery to this day. But those who dare to play Dead by Daylight, beware, you may never come back. Story 4. The story takes place in the dark and unsettling world of classic card games, where the line between reality and fantasy becomes increasingly blurred. As the story unfolds, we are introduced to a group of friends who gather to play a game of cards. At first, everything seems normal, but as the game progresses, strange things begin to happen. The cards seem to have a life of their own, and the players feel a growing sense of unease. As the night wears on, the players begin to see visions of terrifying creatures lurking in the shadows. The creatures are grotesque and otherworldly, with gnarled claws and glowing eyes. They seem to be emanating from the cards themselves. The players try to ignore the apparitions and continue playing, but the creatures become more and more aggressive. They begin to speak to the players, tempting them with offers of wealth and power. One by one, the players succumb to the creatures' enticements, and they become obsessed with winning the game at any cost. As the stakes get higher and higher, the creatures become more and more malevolent, feeding off the players' fear and desperation. As the night wears on, the game takes on a life of its own, and the players find themselves trapped in a nightmare. They realize too late that they have entered into a Faustian bargain, and there is no way out. The game becomes a battle for their souls, and the creatures become more and more aggressive. They claw at the players' faces, snarl and hiss, and whisper dark promises in their ears. The players scream in terror, but there is no escape. As dawn breaks, the players are left in a state of shock and disbelief. They realize that they have been forever changed by the horrors they have witnessed, and that they will never be the same again. The game has claimed their souls, and they are doomed to a lifetime of darkness and despair. In conclusion, the story is a haunting tale of the dangers of playing with forces beyond our control. The line between reality and fantasy is blurred, and the consequences of our actions can be dire. The story is sure to send shivers down readers' spines and leave them questioning the limits of the human psyche. Questioning the limits of the human psyche.